Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. Exciting to be here. Really enjoy the. It's been challenging, as I'm sure you all have found over the past several months, but we seem to be doing okay with Zoom meetings and all the other types of meetings we can have non in person. But it's a real pleasure to be here today and answering some questions and being available to answer additional questions from the audience and from whoever writes in. So I have a few questions that have already been submitted. So I was going to go through those. I'll read the questions and give my answer. There are a couple other VCs that I see in the audience here that I've met and worked with over the past. So if I give something significantly contrary to your view on things, please feel free to chime in. I certainly don't know it all. We work in a specific area. I think, as you'll see with most VCs, they're either specific industry areas or specific stages of development, and usually it's a combination of both. Answers can be dependent on that. And some of the questions I've gotten are broad in the sense of what VCs are looking for, but not industry specific. So that can be a little bit challenging sometimes to answer a broad question there. But I'm just going to dive right in. So the first question is, building processes and efficient work systems has been very time consuming and has limited our potential growth. As a result, it's hard to say that value in a startup can be measured only monetarily. Working on the business has not allowed us as much time as before to work in the business. How can I convince VCs that my company's valuation is worth more than revenue factors? It's a good question. As with any business, and particularly businesses that you're trying to pitch to VCs, you have to manage your time very, very carefully and decide what's the best way to create value with your time at every stage of development. So I'd say there's a lot of factors other than revenue. What we look for, we're an early stage VC firm. We typically look at hard science startups. What we look for is for indication of traction in the marketplace. So many of the companies that we look at and screen are, pre-seed, seed round companies. And so it's rare that they have any revenue. It depends if you want to classify a government grant, if you have an SBIR or something as revenue. We typically don't look like it as that. We look at it as sort of non-dilutive financing, but not really revenue. And I think revenue is a proxy for traction in the marketplace. And so there are lots of proxies for traction, and that can be early partnerships, a strategic partnership with someone, even if it's not very significant monies that are coming to the company, but showing significant engagement. So if you're engaged with a Fortune 100 company in a meaningful way, yet there's not a lot of dollar transfer, that's still very important. Big companies don't like to just give up their time and work with small companies just because. So there's lots of ways other than revenue to demonstrate traction in the marketplace. And I think that's really important to be able to demonstrate whatever your technology is in early stage financings. I think in general, you have to have a balance between how you work on the business and work in the business. Hopefully there's more than one of you, whoever asked this question, but I think you really have to learn how to be selfish with your time and decide what's the appropriate division of labor within let's say there's at least two founders, and maybe there's a first employee, maybe not, but really focus on the key points that are going to allow you to generate traction in the marketplace and proof points to whatever your hypothesis is for around your business. And I wouldn't just establish them and leave them alone. I would establish those proof points internally, but then start to socialize them and see if it makes sense. Get some feedback. Early stage companies are challenging because there's so much to do, but you don't want to be too siloed or too alone. You want to get some feedback from other people in the industry, friends that are in startups or other colleagues. A lot of times, they say the best way to ask for money is to ask for advice. And sometimes, there are a lot of events where VCs are, so getting the early opportunity to pitch or talk to someone about what you're working on is a great way to solicit advice and market information. So I think there's lots of ways to determine that balance, but it is a very important point to find the right balance on how to spend your time in that early time, whether it's the first 6, 12, 18, 24 months before you really raise any significant outside dollars. I hope that answers the question. And Anything different from anybody in the audience that you'd like to jump in, Jay or Minnie? No? Okay, great.
I just say a little bit of what you were just saying at the end, which is the ability to get to really know how that company is being run by the founder or founders, and just understanding how you put it around the division of labor, but it's really important because entrepreneurs wear a lot of hats, and it's important to have that attitude, but it's also important for the venture capitalists to be able to sense that, all right, founder A is doing mostly X, Y, and Z, and founder B is doing mostly G, H, and I, and understanding that, and understanding how that drives the business in those early months as it's just getting out of the garage is key. And it's more of an art than a science to everything I just said, but that tends to be what we lean in on and try to at least get a feeling for, because we're not going to get it from a financial statement or anything like that.
Great. I would agree. And also being upfront, and if you know areas that are missing for you, that's always very helpful to communicate that, to say, look, we need a really strong salesperson or a really strong X person. It's really helpful to bring that up front, to know where areas that you might have some flat spots, because that shows that you've looked at the business holistically and you've recognized as you go forward, these are things you need to add, but you're not ready for them yet, but you're well aware of the sequencing of those new hires. Okay, next question is, how can we do a better job of bringing laboratory technology and research to market? Wow, that's a big question. And that's one of the reasons I co-founded this firm, was to look at very early stage technology, hard technology companies, and how to help those come to market. It is very challenging. I'd say the one area that I'd probably carve, I mean, it's still challenging, but the one area where there's always, I see lots of activity is in life science. The upside there is very significant. So if there's some really interesting technology, I've always been surprised at the early rounds in life science companies and how big they can be, and with small teams, but they have some validated technology. Outside of that, outside of life science, and even in life science, it's really important to have validation of some type of hard tech, whether it's from a university or independently developed. There needs to be some validation of that technology through demonstration, data generation, collaboration. IP filings are good, but a lot of times we'll see a company early stage that, yes, we have this great technology, we filed a patent, but they filed the patent 2 weeks ago. And it makes it really challenging, because until it gets through prosecution, you really don't know where you stand. And to get into lots of diligence early on, it can be challenging. It takes a lot of time and money to do a good job at that, to be able to place it in context of the broader IP landscape. So again, having early stage relationships will definitely help bring the technology to market faster, and can have a big impact on the overall economics, whether it's with a university partnership, a partnership with a major company, government laboratory, nonprofit. There are a lot of different ways to have partnerships out there. And then I'll layer into that the non-dilutive financing. That's always a good way. It can be a little seductive to go after non-dilutive financing that isn't core to what you're doing, and so I caution against that. You really want to, in my opinion, go after non-dilutive financing that only would fund things that you're going to do anyway. And it's never 100% overlap. But if you're working in area A and you're going after this grant, whatever that may be, that is in an area, but it only overlaps with maybe 5 or 10% of what you'd be doing without it, maybe it's not a good idea to take it. You really want to try and make that non-dilutive financing subsidize your R&D efforts and not really distract you from it. And you can get into a pattern of that with various government grants that can be difficult to get out of. So I would caution against that. But I would say overall, it's a challenge. I think there's a lot of early stage VCs now focused on how do we bring earlier stage lab and research technology to market. And I don't think there's an answer yet out there, but it's really trying to find the right mosaic of, partnerships, advisors, early stage investors, non-dilutive financing. All of those things come together to help you, move forward with a good plan. So I hope I answered that. It's a pretty broad question, but at least that's my take on things. Next question is, there's been a lot of talk about VCs now looking for camels instead of unicorns in the current market. Is that what you're hearing from other VCs in the LA market? Okay, again, kind of a broad question in local because it's LA. I would say, in challenging times, and I've heard from other VCs as well, the very first reaction is focus on your existing portfolio companies and not look for new things, because you don't know how long the bad times are going to last. So you become very inwardly focused. How do I support my existing companies versus looking at new investments? And if that's the case, that means that there's typically a longer time to get funding, and valuations can be compressed and deal terms have become less favorable to companies. I'd say there's VCs are like ice cream. There's almost an infinite number of flavors out there. And there are some that always are looking at deals, some that become very inwardly focused in difficult times. The LA market in particular, it's not like we have a huge market. We have a growing number of VCs in the LA market, which is great. But if you're looking for dollars, I wouldn't just be looking at LA. I ran a startup, a CEO for 17 years, and we look globally for dollars, and more so as we got later in stage in development. But you should be pitching in a lot of places, not just for dollars, but to get advice and to get feedback from VCs that might be serving other markets or other industry segments. So I wouldn't really be concerned just about the LA market, but I try to do broader than that, depending on what industry segment you're in. But you'll see VCs, I think, looking at all different stages of development at all times. It's just they'll sort of change their mix of how inwardly focused they are based on how tough the times are out there. Again, it's a pretty broad question, and I don't really have a good feel for industry segment there or stage of development. And so I hope I provided enough detail there, but you should really, just by the end of the question, the LA market would concern me that you're not looking broad enough for financing, or looking broad enough in the VC community to fund your company. Next question, analysis of Axios pro rata data on funding shows health tech, fintech, data, biotech, and enterprise SaaS being the top 5 types of startup being funded in June. Those are the kind of pitches you're seeing, those industries prevalent in the greater Pasadena, LA market. Month by month data is very, very challenging. I don't like looking, quarterly can be challenging in and of itself, but when you look at just month by month, I think that can give you not a very good picture of what's going on. So I'd want to look at broader, but I would say health tech is, those markets that were identified, health tech, fintech, data, biotech, and enterprise SaaS, those have been very significant areas for many, many quarters now, and will continue to be. I do think there's some other areas as well, but there's good representation from all of those in the Pasadena and the broader LA market. So I think that we see pitches all the time from those areas, as not only in Pasadena, but much more broadly. We have investments, even though we're an early stage firm, to companies up in the Bay Area, a couple companies in Europe. So there's definitely some breadth. And again, I would caution from any kind of month-to-month data collection and really look at overall trends. But again, there are hundreds of deals being done on a regular basis. So I wouldn't be too discouraged if you see a particular area going down. If you really believe in what you're doing, you should keep doing it, and try to get that feedback from colleagues, from other executives and startups, and from VCs at events, or if you can get personal connections and intros. But if you're a true believer, you got to push through the downtimes and not worry about what's hot or what's, or what people are investing in today. Last question here is, what are some ways entrepreneurs can boost their chances in obtaining funding during the pandemic? That's a good one. Innovate Pasadena has been trying to do as many virtual events as we can. It's obviously challenging. I would say one thing you need to think about is focus. I'd say that in general, whenever there's tough times, focus is always a good thing to go towards. What are your core competencies? What is your team good at? What could you add? And also plan for when we come out of it. Obviously that's unsure whether it's going to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but we will come out of it, and you want to come out of it stronger. So tough times, as long as they don't break you, they tend to make you stronger and tend to force you to really make tough decisions. And one thing, I've been through a few of those tough times, 9/11, the financial downturn. We were oil and gas focused for a while, so we had a couple of those boom to bust transitions we had to make. And each of those tough times, I recognized that the faster I acted and the more severely I acted in, curtailing my burn, in focus, short-term revenue, current customers, those all helped not only the current business, but when we came out of the downturn, it really helped us, grow faster and allow it to the business to take on a more clear direction. So I think it's really important to, I don't want to say take advantage of the downtimes, but manage the downtimes. A lot of companies do really well because they manage the downtimes and not necessarily because they do great in the uptimes. And it's just like the stock market. A lot of people make money when there are bull markets, but the bear markets really separate out the talent from just your average investor. So I'd say the same thing in companies, really taking a very internal look at what you're doing. Has your fundamental value proposition changed? Could you take advantage of the downtime? We have a couple of our companies that we work with that we've invested in that have sort of pivoted a little bit. I wouldn't say a major pivot, but definitely focused in providing data for some of the issues in pandemic, as well as some of the reagent life science companies that we're working with as well, focusing some of their attention there because there is a lot of interest and traction from partners, not just they're not ready to sell commercially, but they have partnerships that have developed because of that. So I would say when you say of chances of obtaining funding, the stronger the business you have, the better the chances are. So whatever you can do there to, minimize your burn rate, to have a focused and clear message, and also be aware of, if you ask the question, well, how has the pandemic affected your business today, and how will it affect it over the next 12 to 24 months? Being able to answer that clearly, I think, is really important. So I hope that answers the question there. Let me see, I definitely have some things in the chat, so let me open that up here.
Hey, Mike, it's Minnie. I asked something in the chat, but maybe I only, maybe I didn't. But anyways, I meant to.
I didn't see it, but feel free to ask now or comment.
No, maybe I was just privately back channeling with Jay. Anyways, my point was, I would love to know more about what you're specifically investing in. I actually don't know a whole lot about where you're looking, both sector-wise as well as stage-wise.
Sure. So we look at pretty much all early stage hard tech outside of life science. And when I mean life science, I really talk about therapeutics. So we have a life science tool company that we invested in. We have a medical device company that we invested in. We've also invested in a semiconductor company, software companies that use proprietary data sets. So those are and then a couple of other industrial biotech companies that are really looking at industrial applications, not life science applications of biotech. Those are the types of companies that we've invested in and that we continue to look at.
And how far along are they usually?
Some of them, let's see, a couple of them, one of them we were involved in the co-founding of the company with the entrepreneurs. A couple others, they were pre-seed and seed. And then two of them, we've done follow-ons in the Series A. So they're all pretty early, I would say pre-seed and seed, but we always keep enough dry powder to participate in at least through the Series A.
And so will you often participate in like a seed round? So like if I'm diligencing like a hard science company, is that a good time you can come and—
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
we've shared diligence on several companies that we've invested in. We've co-invested, Jay's on the phone now with Wavemaker. We've co-invested with Jay on a couple of companies. We've co-invested with Embark on a company and some others in a couple others in Europe. So we love to share deals and help share the burden, and we have broader perspective on, whatever that technology may be, depending on what it is, if we have internal expertise or advisors that have expertise in that field.
Thanks.
Sure. So to take a look here, let's see. feel free. Oh, here's one. Since VCs tend to bet on jockeys, not just the horse, getting to know the founder is really key. And I would agree with that. The earlier stage the company, the more important the jockey is. And that's because you have a very small team. So if you're having challenges with any one individual, it can be really impactful for the business. And the performance of those first 2 or 3 employees is going to be key to the success of the business. So it's really important to get to know them. And so anything you can do. So a lot of people say they're going to go out and raise money. And I'll ask them, well, how many investors have you talked to? I haven't yet. Well, before you actually go out and try to raise money, I think it's really important to, it's because it needs to be a process that you run where you really dedicate, a super majority of your time to raising money. You really need to go out there and socialize. There's enough networking events and enough people that you can, call or talk to, speak with virtually, meet with virtually, that you can get some feedback. I think it's really important. You don't want to, make all the effort to get an intro to a VC and then blow it because you missed some basic stuff. Now, if you're a seasoned entrepreneur, have done this several times before, I apologize. You probably know better, but there are a lot of first timers out there that think they have all the answers and they make a pitch and they get derailed. And a lot of times you don't get a second chance. So you don't want to waste that opportunity if you get an in from your law firm or in from a colleague or whatever. Make sure you have a refined pitch and make sure you have a well-vetted idea or plan that you're trying to move forward, and get some critical feedback, and don't be afraid to take some lumps with that feedback. It's important. Have an open mind and listen. It's important to be a good listener. I can't stress that enough for early stage entrepreneurs. You need to listen. The art of listening is, we love to see passion, but you need to listen. You need to listen to that feedback, and maybe you'll get different views, but they're not just talking for the sake of talking. They're trying to give you honest feedback. So listen to that feedback and see if it makes sense to you, and see how it fits into the rest of the feedback that you've been getting from other advisors or other VCs and colleagues.
And so, Mike, the other half of that question, and that was my question that you just read, is how do you, both from the entrepreneur's perspective and the VC's perspective, now that we can't get to know each other in person, we would typically go to the person's office, we might go to lunch, dinner, we might go to a golf course, but we would get to know the founders, and almost all those things are off the table right now. How do you suggest entrepreneurs compensate for the fact that they can't just swing by Idea Lab anymore and spend a couple hours really getting to know you and Richard, and you can't swing by their office to really get to know them? But what can we do to compensate for that?
Probably I would recommend the frequency of contact, not necessarily the length. If you can't sit down and spend a couple hours with somebody because it's challenging now, maybe you could set up short calls, whether they're Zoom or not, or just calls. Having more frequent and giving some updates. One of the things that I've also tried to impress upon early stage companies and entrepreneurs is that you don't want to just communicate in the uptime. So many people love to send out updates. Hey, we just got this deal done, whatever. I say, look, get in the habit of putting out regular updates, preferably on a quarterly basis, to people, and get people on your email list. When you make contact with a VC, say, hey, would you mind if I put you on, and ask them permission, because you don't want to get a bunch of junk in your box, but say, hey, is it okay if I put you on my quarterly update list? I'd love to keep you apprised of our developments over time. Most VCs will say, sure. And it is a way. I mean, granted, it's only quarterly. Maybe you could do a little bit more often and make it short and sweet if it's going to be more often than quarterly. But you're going to have to make the extra effort. Downtimes, whatever they may be, in financial downtimes or pandemics, although they haven't happened that often. Frequency is probably going to be the substitute for longer, in-depth meetings, and really taking the time to decide what are the important facts to communicate, what are the proof points about your business that are going to have impact with that potential investor, and listen. If they said, hey, if you've got it's a really interesting idea, but I don't know if anybody would be interested in that from a partnership point of view. Let's say you then get a partnership. Hey, a quick little email to say, just following up, and we had a chat last month. It was great. Hey, just want to let you know, can't disclose the name of the company. It's confidential right now, but we did sign a partnership with a significant company in this area, in the area that we talked about. Just let them know that, hey, you checked off a proof point. You'll get to it eventually. You don't have to disclose it. You can say it's a confidential relationship, but at least you put a stake in the ground and let them know that, hey, I made progress in a tangible way that's meaningful to them. So I'd say whatever you can to give those updates, keep them short and sweet and to the point, and preferably responsive to a question or a concern that they might have had in a previous discussion. Trying to see if there's anything else that people might be interested in. I would say just keep at it. One of the things about entrepreneurs is we tend to be very tenacious, very failure tolerant. So, stay with it. I know these are tough times. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of time on deals and we do some strategic consulting as well, and efficiencies have gone down. So if you're used to working a 50, 60-hour week, unfortunately, you probably need to tack on maybe 20% on top of that because of efficiency issues. So it is challenging, and finding that right balance during these times can be challenging, but I'd say stick with it and really push forward. The true believers, you'll find it eventually. And you hear all these success stories of people who, got turned down time and time and time again. Just the gentleman who took Zoom public earlier, right? He was turned down by several people. It was his former boss at Cisco that actually was one of his early investors. And I think he turned $150,000 investment into something like $50+ million in the IPO. But it was like, hey, who's going to do that? There's already WebEx out there. There's already competing platforms. But he believed, and he was successful. So many, many times it's about being tenacious, being failure tolerant, and just sticking to it. And at the same time, trying to get information from the market broadly, colleagues, other investors, advisors, friends who have done it before, and take best advantage of this tough time to come out of it stronger, more focused, and more determined to be successful. Happy to take a last minute comment for anybody out there if you want to speak up, but I really enjoyed the questions. I hope I was able to answer them. As I mentioned, some of them were pretty broad, but hope it's good information, and hope that you were able to attend some of the Innovate Pasadena virtual events. We can't wait for things to open up. As you probably saw, unfortunately, just a week ago, Pasadena, the first time in 75 years, canceled the Rose Parade, which gives you a feeling for what it's like out there. And we want to get back to real events because we think networking events are a great way to meet people and to socialize your ideas and to get feedback. Don't know when that's going to be, but we can't wait to have that happen so we can really get out there and help our community grow and help the ecosystem in the broader Pasadena area, get to be a better and more vibrant ecosystem. I'd like to thank everybody for joining, all the guests and other commentators and like to thank the Innovate Pasadena staff, Cayenne in particular, for getting this put together and organized, and really appreciate everybody's attendance and engagement, and wish everybody the best of luck in getting their companies funded, and hope to see you in person sometime in the near future. And I wish you all the best.